there's something so special about you and me, babe. You got me, you got me, you got me. So just say the words, cause you know what it means to me, babe. When you got me, you got me, you got me.
Hey, it's time for Improve with Auntie, a serious roundtable for serious aunties like us. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I'm seriously ready to get this started.
There's something so special about you and me, babe. You got me, you got me, you got me. So just say the words, cause you know what it means to me, babe. When you got me, you got me, you got me.
Welcome to Improve with Auntie, and if you've been here for episodes 1 and 2, welcome back. You know there's something magical about the number 3, so I know you're going to love this episode. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I confess I'm a little late with releasing this episode. This show is new enough that you probably didn't notice, or maybe you did. Maybe you were waiting by your phone for this episode to pop up in your feed. But I have a great excuse. As a busy podcast producer and business owner, I usually get time to work on editing this show on the weekends. And the last 2 weekends were dedicated to the much more important and oh so much more fun job of Auntie Playdates. One full day with all 3 of my nieces back to back with an entire weekend at my house with the 4-year-old, not to mention the necessary energetic recovery period for 24 hours after. Seriously, parents, how the heck do you do it day in and day out? You must be existing in a perpetual twilight zone of sleep deprivation. The podcast had to wait. But I did have so much opportunity to observe examples of today's topic in action, emotional intelligence. It's a big one, y'all, worthy of an entire show. Like, not an episode, but like a show. And I know we only just scratched the surface in this episode. My 1-year-old twin nieces have just gotten to the stage where they are relating to each other and playing together more as like separate humans who are aware of each other's existence. And they're noticing how what they do affects other people's reactions. They love to do stuff that they know they're not supposed to and watch your face to see how you're going to react. Also, twins are fascinating. It's like they share a secret brain. The 4-year-old is cautiously re-emerging into social interactions since this whole isolating pandemic has been raging on. She even made a momentary new friend when I took her to the Nature Museum this weekend. Watching them through all of these growth stages is both wonderful and terrible. In a moment, you're going to hear from not just me, but my incredible roundtable of aunties. Lisa Widder, my longtime creative collaborator who writes the show notes and episode descriptions for this show, and many others at the Creative Imposter Studios. Pam Covarrubias, podcaster, business coach extraordinaire who you met on episode 2, Money, 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 Honey. And P.S., check out her podcast, Café con Pam. And Caren Evers, who you met on episode 1, and who actually is the one who suggested this topic for our roundtable one day when we were musing on the popularity of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood for the 2 to 4 set. I mean, my borderline Gen X millennial cohort grew up with Mr. Rogers, the origin of Daniel Tiger, but somehow I don't think we learned to process emotions quite the same way as some kids are these days. I do also want to acknowledge that I get a little uncomfortable right about here because I know that I am also coming at this from a place of relative privilege with my Midwestern middle-class white upbringing. And there are many socialized and economic factors that go into learning how to process emotions and develop emotional intelligence. In fact, we all at Improve with Auntie really want to keep having this conversation and get even more perspectives. As you're listening, I'm sure stuff is going to come up for you. Opinions, memories, examples, stories, questions, challenges, ideas. We want to hear them. As we are nearing the midway point of this first pilot season of the show, I'm still deciding whether there will be a season 2 to follow. And hearing from you would be a huge push toward a season 2 green light yes. So send us your thoughts and stories and questions about emotional intelligence or any other topics related to being an aunt at bit.ly/ask aunties. You can record it as a voice memo on your phone or computer and upload the audio file for us to play so that we can hear it in your voice. Or if you'd rather type it out, email it to andrea@thecreativeimposter.com with the subject line, Improve with Auntie. And we may just share it on a future episode. Those links, of course, will be in our show notes in the episode description in your app and at improvewithauntie.com. You'll also find the link to our Cool Aunties newsletter. Yes, newsletters are still cool. We'll let you know when new episodes drop, along with other opportunities to connect and be part of the show. Get your name on our Cool Auntie list at bit.ly/Cool Auntie list. And then lastly, if you'd really like to help us out with a season 2, consider becoming a producer of the show with a one-time financial contribution in the amount of your choosing. It totally helps us meet our production expenses, which might be more than you think. The link to our tip jar is at thecreativeimposter.com/auntie-tips. Whew. How are you feeling? You ready? Take a deep breath. And away we go. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Improve with Auntie podcast. This is our emotional intelligence issue. And issue? Are we a magazine?
Episode.
Could be. Audio magazine.
Well, there are issues.
Yes, there are issues. Yes, the emotional intelligence issue has issues. So 2 things. One, I almost set my apartment on fire moments ago. I was multitasking. So I was on a training call for my educational program on Zoom on my phone. On my computer, I was designing social media posts for a client. I was also making dinner for my partner's mother. And I was also snacking because I didn't really have time for dinner. So that's 4 tasks that I was trying to complete at the same time. And I was like, why is there a weird smell outside? And I thought it was coming through the window because the window is open. I was like, oh, that smell is awful. It's so toxic. Wait, it smells like something's on fire. Who's burning something outside? Somebody's burning something. And then I was like, oh no, that smell is coming from my kitchen. I had a pot of soup on the stove and the soup was fine, but there was a cutting board nearby made out of an undetermined material. Like it's not exactly wood, but it's not exactly plastic. It's some like composite thing. And it was flat out on fire. I almost thought I was going to need the fire extinguisher, which I've never used in my life. And it still smells a little toxic in here. Strike 1. And then emotional intelligence number 2, there were 2 more aunties that were supposed to join us tonight, and they both couldn't come because of needing to take some mental health time and having a rough day. So I am curious to have a little check-in and have us each introduce yourself by your name, where you are currently located, who you're an auntie to, just generally, and how are you doing? And I want to start with Caren.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. My name is Caren. I live in Chicago, and I am the aunt to 2 nephews. They are 5 and 8 years old. And I think my mental health is okay. I have to admit, the last couple of days, my neighbor has been texting me in the afternoon saying, it's beautiful outside. Let's go for a walk on the lakefront. And so the walks on the lakefront are very grounding and calming for me. So I'm in a good mood.
Well, I'm Pam Covarrubias. I am in San Diego, the land of the Kumeyaay Nation, and I am aunt by blood to Chloe and Ian. And I have lots of nieces and nephews. I have lots of friends with kids. And I won't have time to name them all, but sending love to everyone. And my mental health, right now it's okay. I think when I realize that it's not so okay is when I'm scrolling, which I don't typically scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, ooh, that's when I do check-ins and I ask myself, am I numbing right now or what am I looking for? And then I realize that it's been 4 or 5 minutes and I don't remember what I've been scrolling through. So it's my kind of cue to say, it's time to take a break, like an actual break, not a social media, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Like go for a walk, breathe some air, go hike.
Yeah.
Off screens. We've been on screens for too long.
Off screens and away from toxic burning fumes.
I am Lisa. I am in Chicago and I am auntie to 3. So there is Hannah, who is 17, Olivia, who is 15, and Aiden, who is 12. My mental health, I was telling Andrea earlier that I don't know that I was having any issues today. I would just think it was like low key. I was in a mood. So on my way home this evening, I stopped off and bought a bag of chips and some wine from Target, the really high caliber stuff. And it was funny to see other people in line with, I would say, similar purchases. It was definitely sort of a hump day purchase.
So we're either blaming Wednesday or we're blaming astrology or both. I feel like we should have t-shirts made that say blame astrology.
Yeah.
My horoscope told me.
My horoscope told me.
This was all predetermined. Yeah.
Yeah.
Starlight, star bright, first star, see night. Baby, come with me and take flight. Alright, starlight, star bright, first star, see night. Baby, come with me, cause I just want stars in my room. Light up, light up.
So when we say emotional intelligence as relates to our nieces, nephews, all of the younger than us folk in our lives, what's the first thing that you think of? What comes to mind?
When it comes to my niece and nephew, I think, and even the adopted ones, it's about supporting and holding space for them. Maybe they don't feel that they can share with their parents so much. And so I feel that I'm the first to be like, ooh, how safe are you to, as an adult, to share something? And then we'll go. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Have they come to you with specific things, or do you kind of just like observe it and detect it?
I detect it. So recently, for example, my niece is 11 and she was having a sleepover with her best friend. So the best friend knows me because they've been best friends since they're like in kindergarten. So they're now 11. So she's one of the adopted ones. And we were talking and then they were telling me about another sleepover that they were having. And they were just like telling me all the things. And me having grown up with a Latinx family, that there's a lot of stigma about and shame around the things that teenagers do or preteens do. I was like, ooh, this is not something that I would ever share with adults. And so I found it very interesting that they found me safe to share those things. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So it's more so, I don't know, maybe a little part of me is healing as they find me a safe person to share with.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good point.
Just like Pam was saying, I feel like I'm safe harbor and that's my role. And for my eldest niece, Hannah, she and I say, are growing up in very similar situations. She's the oldest. I was the oldest. There is some trauma healing that needs to take place for both of us around alcoholism. So emotional intelligence is maybe providing for her, and then as they get older, the other two as well, the things that I am now learning to accept and make use of for myself and my own healing.
So my nieces are 4, and then I have 2 one-year-old twins. The 4-year-old, she definitely has her moods, and I can tell like what triggers her mom, which is my sister. So I think like as she gets older, I'm imagining she lives in the suburbs of Chicago and I'm in the city. And I can imagine that it'll be like Auntie's urban oasis where she can have like urban auntie retreats. But I'm still kind of like navigating, what does that mean? Like, how do I provide that space? How do I make sure she knows? Because I don't really feel like when I was growing up, I don't think I had that. Like I had friends, but I don't think I had adults that I would be like, oh, I can go to this person for this, or oh, I can ask this person this, or whatever.
I didn't, and it was actually my aunt, but she betrayed me because she told my mom a secret that I told her. And so that pained me for the rest of my life. And then to this day, I have done therapy over this because I know the damage that like I told her in confidence. And then next thing I know, I'm in trouble. And I was like, nobody knew this. And so then it just became a thing because I was young and, you create stories from situations that happen. So I had to go to therapy over, like not specifically over this, but it's come up. And so me as an aunt now, I make sure that if I get a secret, then unless it's going to put the kid in danger or, I haven't had to navigate those waters like the secret that I had shared because I was a teenager. So it's older. My niece and nephew aren't quite as old yet. And I wonder sometimes, like, if that happens, how am I going to deal with it?
I guess there's two questions. It's like, how do you heal from that broken trust? One. And then two, how do you, as an aunt, like the idea of keeping secrets feels a little bit like sticky. What happens if they tell you something in confidence? Yeah, it's sticky, right?
Well, it's very sticky. And it's very clear. I don't think kids need to have secrets with adults. Period. And somebody I know, she does consent education and she talks about that there's a lot of grooming that happens now over the internet with kids. And so the conversation of secrets is something it's so important. And I mean, she was one of my clients at some point. And so I'm hyper aware of the secret part. And so I never want them to tell me secrets. I think kids are smart. And so if that happens, then I would say, look, first of all, we don't have secrets. And so as an adult that heard this is something that needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to do this? Is that something that you want to say? Do you need my support? Instead of going behind my back, I think.
Yeah.
I believe that we can be supportive to children or young people and to their level of age without betraying them.
So one summer, my nephews came up to visit me in Chicago and I took them to the park. And my younger nephew, he was 4 years old at the time. He was running around the playground and there was another little boy about his age running around the playground, but they weren't friends. This little boy was from Chicago and my nephew was from out of town. And the little boy clearly wanted to play with my nephew. And my nephew was like having none of it. He just wasn't into strangers that day. I'm not sure why. And so at one point, my nephew, he goes down the slide, but then he stops halfway down like a little brat. I'm not sure why. And then this little boy waits the normal amount of time that you would wait for someone to go down the slide and then runs into my nephew. Oh. And so my nephew comes down just, screaming mad. And he was saying, I am mad at that kid. He bumped into me on the slide. And I was like, well, you stopped halfway down the slide. It makes sense to me that he bumped into you. But what kind of struck me in the moment was that as a 4-year-old, he was able to identify his feelings like that, because I don't think I could do that until I was 40. And second of all, he felt okay talking about it, to say like, there's some strange kid on the playground that bumped into me and I am mad about it. Because when I was a little kid, I would have been shushed. My parents would have said to me, you're not allowed to be mad. Be a good girl. Be polite. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You're not allowed to say that you're mad. That's not polite. But recently, my nephews, they are allowed to say when they're mad or when they're sad or when they're scared. They're allowed to talk about their feelings in a way where I would have been shushed when I was a kid. And I'm very happy about that. They're growing up in a time when they can just come into the kitchen and say, well, I'm sad today. Then you can talk about why.
I think that that's something that we work on quite a bit in my own family, with my nephew specifically, because we were so conscious of him growing up in this sort of toxic male environment that still permeates everything. And I've noticed the needle changing. Maybe it's not small, but he's in a very competitive travel baseball team. And they're 11 and 12-year-olds. And this team has sort of been together since I think maybe they were 8 or 9. And they hug each other. They are so physically happy to see each other. There's not a lot of this, too cool for whatever. Or if somebody's nervous on the mound, they'll go out there and talk to them. And it's definitely, I see the changes from maybe when I was his age to his contemporaries, in that they're, especially for boys, are definitely much more open with their feelings.
I remember that this conversation with my niece and her friend, they went to a sleepover where there was this other friend. The kids have drama all the time. It's so funny. And so they were at a sleepover with this other girl who there was a fallout at some point before. And so when the fallout happened, I was talking to my niece about it. And it's interesting. So to piggyback on what everyone said, kids are so intelligent now, because my niece was like, well, this girl, she says a lot of inappropriate things, but it's because her family, she lives in a really troubled family. So her mom does a lot of drugs and her parents are never taking care of her. And so it makes sense. And I'm like, okay, an 11-year-old's telling me this. And so then, going back to the sleepover conversation, I'm talking to them and I'm like, how was it? And they were like, well, this girl was there, but they were just saying all these mean things, but we decided to just ignore them because it's better. Otherwise, we're just like fueling the fire. And I'm like, who am I talking to?
I know,
right? You're like, y'all don't need me.
Right. Like, all right.
Wow.
And one of the things that my sister has always done is talk to them as they're like, there's no kid talking. There's no like, oh, me. It's always talk to them like they understand. And we've always had conversations with them as if we're having a conversation with another human being. And so it's really cool to see how they're growing into making their own decisions and discerning what's good and discerning what's bad. And then being able to share it with the adults and say, that's what it is. And not necessarily need the adult to kind of guide them into deciding. It's just like, yeah, you're right. All right. Good for you.
At this point, Pam had to dip out a little early. This woman is the queen of productivity and she had client calls to make. But don't worry, through the temporal magic of editing, she'll be back later in the episode for our Ask Aunties segment. I had this experience when Riv was staying with me and we went to the playground in my neighborhood. And now she was an only child for the first 3 years of her life. And also, the age of 3 was spent during pandemic lockdown times. So that's like a crucial social development year in childhood development, I guess. And she was isolated at home. She couldn't go to preschool. She couldn't play with other kids. She wasn't really going out in public that much. So then when it became okay to go to the playground and like have masks on and whatever, we went, and I could see that she wanted so badly to play with other kids on the playground that were just like random strange kids, like you were mentioning, Caren. But she didn't know how to do that. And especially she always seeks out, like she has no interest in playing with boys at all. But the girls who are slightly older than her, that's who she wants to play with. And so there was one girl on the playground who was a little bit older than her. And this girl, I couldn't see if she had an adult anywhere with her nearby or if she was just there by herself or whatever. And this girl, she was like a really good climber, and Riv likes to climb. She was like running around the playground. She was interacting with other kids. Like she's the epitome of the cool girl on the playground that doesn't really need validation to be cool. And she's also like friendly and open, but she doesn't need anything. She's cool on her own, or she's cool hanging out with somebody, like whatever. And she came over by where we were and she was like, hi. And Riv was like deer in headlights, like kind of starstruck. And at first she was like, I'm playing here. And I was like, excuse me? And the girl was like, okay. And then suddenly Riv was like, hey, like as soon as the girl didn't care that she had been rejected, and she was just like, okay, cool. I'm just going to do my own thing, whatever. And then she was like, hey. And she wanted to play with her. But like that girl was flitting around, like playing with this boy, playing with this girl, doing this thing, playing on this thing. And Riv wanted her to just play with her. She didn't want the other people. And so that girl was like running around the playground and she was like chasing after her. And she was like, hey, come do this thing. And the girl would just look at her and then go do what she wanted to do anyways. Or she'd be like, come over here. She wasn't ignoring her, but it was just, I'm not going to play just with you in your own little bubble. I want to just like explore the playground and whatever. And she eventually was going to play tag with this other little boy and Riv. They invited River to play, and she didn't really understand the rules that they had made for this like tag game. She didn't realize that if you get tagged, that you're now it. She just didn't fully understand the concept. And they were trying to explain it to her. And she was just running and laughing. But whenever there was like supposed to be structure, she didn't get it. And it was so hard for me to watch her wanting so desperately to fit in, but then also like not being very nice to the little boy because he like tried to say something to her and she was just like, I don't want to play with you. And I'm like, oh my God, you're being a jerk. And then like when the other girl wouldn't pay attention to her, wouldn't do what she wanted her to do, then she would be like, I want to play with you. I want to. And she just was like trying so hard, but also doing a bad job. And there was this part of me that was like, I want to help her, but like also she needs to figure this out on her own.
Mm-hmm. She does. It was interesting what you just said, because associating it to what Caren was saying earlier about her own experiences growing up. If River turns to somebody and says, I don't want to play with you, that's her truth. Because you said she wasn't being nice about it. I bristle about the word nice because it's what the three of us as women were taught to be as girls. And it has created decades of problems. So she did fine. You did fine. You're both trying to feel it out. At least this is my view.
Yeah.
She can turn to somebody and say, I don't want to play with you, and own it and have it and just be like, I don't want to play with you. She shouldn't obviously push somebody down and kick them and say, I don't want to play with you.
She did not do that.
But she's owning exactly what she wanted, and she wants to go play with someone else. So this boy, he just didn't make the grade that day. So
I had similar experiences, especially when my oldest nephew was young and I, was kind of taking him to the park for the first time. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, I hope the other kids like him. And I was like so emotionally invested in it. And I wonder if a part of it is that as aunts, like we only take them to the playground every once in a while. Like for me, it's once a year. But for parents, like they're doing that weekly or, a few times a week or something like that. And they're kind of seeing it a little bit more. So I think we have a little bit different perspective on that, kind of almost like an outsider's perspective more than the kids and the parents do. And so we're probably observing it a little bit more acutely than anyone else is.
Yeah. The parents are just like, thank God my child can run around and I don't have to like entertain them at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I get it too, because I was like, I hope they like him. And I was like so emotionally invested in him, like getting it along with the other kids on the playground. And then it's like, Caren, take a breath. Like, he'll be fine. He's just going to run around,
Yeah, he won't even remember. And that was the thing. I was like, she's so invested in this girl, but she's not even going to remember her however many days from now. And by the time we get home, she might not even, I don't even know.
And there are some parts of the experience that she will remember, like her auntie took her to the park and it was just the two of you. So those are the things that she'll remember. Or she may, years from now, look back and think, oh my God, there was this coolest girl at the park. She was amazing. And base her entire ebullient outlook on this one girl.
Right, yeah.
Follow my lead, yeah, invest in me. Follow my lead, I got the recipe. Follow my lead, living my destiny. Follow my lead, yes indeed, I bring out the best in me.
So I'm also curious with boys, we were talking about this whole idea of them being able to have emotion, to express emotions other than I was reading this book, actually. I was studying for the episode that we were going to record about love and dating and sex and relationships. So I was reading this book, and she was talking about gender norms and gender roles and how for so long for boys, the only emotions you are allowed to express are confidence, which is not really emotion, but like a sense of strength and accomplishment and confidence. And then anger. Boys can express anger, and that is also valid. Anger, rage, whatever. But like, that's it. And I wonder how much that is or isn't changing right now. How do we hold space for boys in that?
I've read articles that talk about just what you're talking about. Like, little boys go out on the playground and they beat each other up and they wrestle and they play football and they play all the sports and they're whacking on one another and they're very adversarial on the playground. And then the bell rings and it's time to go inside and they just wipe it all off and they're just back to being friends in the classroom. Whereas when the little girls are on the playground, I don't know if they're playing hopscotch or foursquare or whatever, and everybody's very nice to one another. If anybody hurts your feelings, then you don't talk to them for a month or something like that. And so in terms of resilience, little boys learn resilience really quickly because they learn like, well, we're done playing the game now. It's over. We're back to being friends in the classroom. And a lot of little girls and women struggle with that. Just
competitiveness in boys is more of like, we're playing this game and it's this isolated thing. Whereas with girls, it tends to be more like, I'm competitive with you for life.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, it must be time for cool things aunties do. A time for us to shine in our own awesomeness.
And I was thinking of another emotion that boys were never allowed to express, and that is uncertainty. To go with that confidence, you always had to be confident. And one of the things that I do with all of them is I take that one for a weekend. So they each get sort of like auntie camp time. When it's just them, they come into the city and we go do stuff. And now, because we've done it for so many years, they have things that they want to do. And then I try to come up with some new stuff for them to do. One year, I want to say my nephew was probably 8. And I took him on one of the riverboats, one of the commuter riverboats to Chinatown. And as soon as you get off of the boat at the pier in Chinatown, you are pretty much in Chinatown to the point where there are the same flyers and everything that you see on poles in your neighborhood, but they're written in Chinese. The tow signs are in Chinese, all of that. And my nephew was suddenly he felt like he was thrust into this situation, part of the dominant group. And part of the reason I took him there was because of that. And we walked around Chinatown for a while and we found stores with fidget spinners and things that he could relate to. And of course, food. Everybody loves food, and food is such a great way to bring people together. At some point when we were on the boat coming back north, he said something to the effect of, "Why are there so many of them here?" And I realized this was probably right after Trump got the nomination, maybe. And also there were people in his neighborhood on his block that were anti-Obama. So he had sort of grown up surrounded by people who had these views. And we had a conversation about it. And I was suddenly hyper vigilant about making sure that he didn't get pulled into or maybe sink into this protectionist and supremacist culture that is definitely prevalent in the suburbs. It just is. It just is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's prevalent everywhere, but it's pronounced in suburban areas for whatever reason. And I think I did it enough, and I did it not in a way that was teachy or preachy, but I tried to tie it into this idea of emotional intelligence and tell him that it was okay to not understand the language. It was okay to not see people that looked like him. It was okay to be in an area that wasn't his, and that he could enjoy and explore and learn, and then find those things that were familiar to him, like fidget spinners and noodles, for example. And to this day, it's been 4 years, he says, remember that time we went to Chinatown? That was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uncertainty and discomfort.
Yeah. Discomfort was the word that came to mind as you were telling that story, that
It's okay.
it's okay to be out of your comfort zone. Yeah.
That it's okay to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's okay to explore it too, to not just say, I'm uncomfortable and walk away, but say, why are you uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know what any of the language is. I said, that's okay.
You made me think of a story. So this is my little cousin, so not my nephew, but my cousin's daughter. When she was about 4 years old, we were having a family party, and she came up to me and she said, Caren, where's your husband? And I was like, oh, well, I'm not married. And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I don't have a husband. I'm a single woman. And she's like, every woman has a husband. Because she was 4 years old and living in a predominantly Catholic area. And, every grown woman that she saw was married, because that was the suburb that she lived in. And so to kind of be the one person who is different than her neighborhood or her suburb or her school or something like that, I think that's an important thing that aunties can kind of bring to these kids. So whether it's a trip to Chinatown or, a trip into the Loop in Chicago, or to kind of take them out of their neighborhood and their family and their safe space and just show them, even for a couple of hours, like, people live differently than you do.
That segues perfectly back to our segment of Ask Aunties with Pam's question. And now the moment you've been waiting for, Ask Aunties. I don't know why I do a grand gesture whenever I introduce a segment, because no one on the podcast will see the grand gesture. So it's literally just for the people on the call.
It was really grand, though, if anybody's wondering.
It's grand.
So the question is, how do we deal with our friends having children when we do not? Which obviously changes dynamics, right? It changes the dynamics of the friendship. It changes the dynamics of interactivity. Remember what I said earlier about temporal editing magic? Here's Pam.
Yeah. So for context, my friends with kids, they're always like, it's so easy to be your friend because you're not mad at me for not getting back to you, or for like responding to your text 3 months later, or, and I'm like, yeah, because why would I be mad? You have humans to make sure they're alive. It's fine. And so I leave that to ponder on, discuss maybe.
You know what? That is like a really hard question, because I have to admit, like all of the girlfriends that I have in the city who've had kids, like we just fall away, we kind of stop being friends. And I think that those women should focus on their kids. Like, I don't fault them for it, but then it's hard to find time to get together, to work around a kid's schedule. And the only friend I've managed to stay connected with is divorced and doesn't have her kids every other weekend. So she's free to hang out then. And I'm going to have to admit, it's kind of tough because, it's kind of the same thing when one of the girlfriends in your group gets a boyfriend and then she's never around either. And you feel like you got dropped for the boyfriend or something like that. It's a little different with kids, but I think that that's super hard. But I really hope someone has a better answer than mine.
I do remember like more when I was in my 20s and none of us had kids. And then all of a sudden people started getting married and having kids. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. There was like this naive part of me that's like, well, whatever, nothing's different. We're still friends. We can still hang out. And I do remember one like super awkward brunch that I went to with two friends from high school that I had stayed friends with through college. And they had each gotten married and they each had their first kids. Like they were under a year old or whatever. And so I wasn't in a relationship with anyone at that time. So I was single. So it was me and my single self with two couples. And I don't think the babies were there. I think the babies were with someone else. But all they could talk about were their babies. And we're at this like cool Chicago brunch place. And it was like diapers, things that happen to your body. I felt like the fifth wheel. I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. And they were like oblivious to the fact that I wasn't part of the conversation at all. And then at some point, my one friend, he turned to me and he was like, so Andrea, like, what's new with you? What's going on with you? And I felt stumped because things were happening, but it sort of felt like they weren't relevant or they weren't as important. And I was like, oh, this is going to be very different moving forward.
It's so funny because I was thinking, who in my circle has kids? And nobody. So I can't answer Pam's question. I mean, I have friends from when I was younger who have had kids. And then I would say we're no longer friends, we're more acquaintances. But I think it's a byproduct of the way that the modern world is structured. And I mean, unless you literally are part of a village where everybody takes care of everybody else, including the kids, I think there's a natural contraction or attrition when people start having children and they need to focus on that. Mm-hmm. And those of us without children are focused on other things. I can't hold up my end of a conversation at a brunch if somebody's talking about labor pains or tuition savings accounts and that kind of thing. It's not that I don't think that those things are important. They're super important. They're just not in my realm of being.
Yeah. I will say, though, that one of my friends, they used to live in Chicago, and that's when we became friends, and they now live in Orlando. And in non-pandemic times, I typically see them once a year because there's usually a conference that I go to that happens to be in Orlando. And they have two daughters who are in kindergarten, and the older one, I can't remember if she's in 8th grade or 9th grade right now. However, something about the dynamic when I go to visit them, and I've been doing this long enough that I've known the girls since when they lived in LA. I babysat for the oldest one when she was still a baby. I picked her up from daycare and she got sick and puked all over the taxi cab. This is like a whole memory that we all vividly have. But there's something about the dynamic that as those girls have like gotten older, that even though I only really see them once a year, they like know who I am. They know that I come once a year for this podcast conference. They know what I do. Actually, I really like her daughters. I think they're both super awesome. They have very outgoing and interesting personalities. They're very creative. And when I go to visit, they hang out with me while I'm there. And definitely when they were young, like it was hard to find time to talk to her on the phone because she'd be like, oh, I have 5 minutes to talk before this one wakes up from a nap, or, oh, I'm really exhausted, or whatever. But now that they're older, she has more independent time because they don't constantly need her. So I think also as the kids get older, you can sometimes kind of get your friend back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
This particular friend, she also had this brilliant idea in 2019 that was going to be for 2020, that she was going to send her oldest daughter in the summer. She was going to send her traveling around the country. She was calling it the Auntie Tour, the summer Auntie Tour.
Whoa.
And she was going to send her to LA to visit this friend, to Chicago to stay with me, to New York to stay with this friend, whatever, so that she could experience traveling on her own, so that she could experience being in different cities. And it was this whole thing that she had in mind that she was going to do. And then, global pandemic. I was like thinking, I'm like, cool, what can I, because I think she might have been like 13 or something like that when she would have come to visit. And so I was like, okay, what are cool things for a 13-year-old to do around Chicago? Like I was coming up with all these like ideas and brainstorms and whatever. And then, yeah, it never happened.
That sounds like an amazing trip, especially for a 13-year-old. My parents never would have let me do that. So I'm jealous. I think the thing that is great about the emotional intelligence that kids are experiencing nowadays is A, that they're able to identify their feelings. I think that's super important. And B is that they're allowed to feel their feelings. And we're not saying, shush, don't do that, or don't be sad. Just stop crying, don't be sad. We're saying it's okay to be sad. And I wish that I had had that when I was a kid. And I think it's so great that kids nowadays get to do that and that we're letting them talk about their feelings and feel their feelings, even if it's inconvenient for us. We let them have that space anyway.
Even when it's scary for us.
Oh, yeah. And inconvenient and time consuming. Yeah, absolutely.
It is inconvenient for you to be having an emotional meltdown right now. Exactly. We have to go home and make dinner.
Exactly. That was my childhood.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of stiff upper lip or stuff it down when we were growing up. And to see kids now having their feelings out there, like Caren said, sometimes it's not convenient, but the alternative is for them to eat it and stuff it down. And we certainly don't want that. We don't want to go back to that.
Yeah, emotions are inconvenient, but so powerful. Thank you so much to our guests, Aunties, Pam, Lisa, and Caren. Thank you to you and all the aunties who are out there supporting our youth and growing into dynamic, resilient, feeling, and thinking humans. You make a difference. Remember to check out Lisa's awesome show notes for links, resources, and more. Send us your questions, ideas, and stories at bit.ly/ask aunties. Get on our cool auntie list at bit.ly/cool auntie list and share this show with someone who would love to hear it. Remember, sharing is caring.
Improve with Auntie is produced by the Creative Imposters Studios.
We are edited by Maddie Shuchuk and Andrea Klunder.
Our technical director is Edwin R. Ruiz.
Music curation and sound design by Andrea Klunder.
Cover art designed by Cindy Alcantara.
Show notes by Lisa Widder.
Follow us on Instagram at Improve with Auntie.
If you have a question for Ask Aunties, a proud auntie moment, or a how not to auntie tale, you can email us or send us a voice note.
Check the show notes for all the ways we can connect at improvewithauntie.com. Thanks so much for sharing your time, your energy, your presence. We appreciate you at Improve with Auntie.